everybody, welcome back to the Quilted Farm Girl Sew Along. Today we're going to be working on the March blocks. We're following the sew along schedule from Fat Quarter Shop. We're going to be making the Farmer's Market blocks. We need 3 of those, and the bee blocks. We need 3 of those as well. The Farmer's Market blocks are here, here, and here, and the bee blocks right there, there, and down here. The Farmer's Market blocks have square and a squares on the corners and hourglass blocks. We will work on those block techniques today. And on the bee blocks, the way they make the wings is called snowballing your corners. So we're going to work on that as well. You do need the Quilted Farm Girl pattern to participate. The pattern is linked below. I am working with the quilt kit, so mine's going to look just like the picture. All the information you need will be linked below. I can't give any measurements. You need to get the measurements from the pattern. I'm designing this as a beginner friendly series for the entire quilt along. We will be going slow through all of the basic skills, and then as we progress, if things repeat, I'll go a little bit faster. I have everything cut, prepped, and labeled, ready to go. All my fabrics have been starched with Faultless Heavy Spray Starch and pressed. I'm using the Alpha Biddies from Fat Quarter Shop. These happen to be the Christmas ones. I needed a couple sets so I could label both blocks. And these mini clothespins come from a company called Mr. Pen. I found them on Amazon. You might be able to find them in craft stores or office supply stores. They help keep the Alpha Biddies in place. I know Fat Quarter Shop now has Alpha Clippies. They're clips. I just don't have those. This is for our Farmer's Market blocks, and all these small pieces are for the bee blocks. Don't worry, we're going to work through it step by step. Just take your time cutting. There are lots of small pieces. You want to try and be as accurate as possible. Get all your fabrics cut, prepped, and organized, and let's start with our Farmer's Market blocks. For this sew along, I'm sewing on my 1927 Singer 66 sewing machine. I have Aurifil Color 2021. I like to have everything next to me on the design board, and then I'll open my instruction book. I have that on a folding metal book stand. I'll link that below. If you hear any banging noises in the background, we're having a little bit of construction done at the house. I'll link the construction playlist below too if you'd like to see what's going on. Let's get started on our Farmer's Market blocks. The first thing the instructions tell us to do is to draw a line on the back of all of our fabric bee squares. So you draw a line corner to corner, or if you have a machine that has a laser, you can use that, or you can use some diagonal seam tape. This is diagonal seam tape, and I do have some of this open. I think I'm going to try that today on my machine. I'll show you how this works. You can see there's a red line in the center, and then there's black lines on either side. They're 1/4 inch lines. You want to line up the red line with your needle, and then put a piece of tape right down your machine. I've got a little piece of batting here. I'm going to lay that over the machine bed so I don't put tape right on that gold detail. I don't want to accidentally pull it up. I use this all the time on some of my other machines, but since this is an antique machine, I want to make sure to protect that. I'm going to grab a piece. That looks long enough. The hardest part is lining it up with the needle. You want your needle to line up with the red, and then of course don't tape over your feed dogs. So what I do sometimes, I cut a little bit off so I've got that extra. I can get closer to the hole where the needle is. I'll do that on the other side as well. Now I can get really close to the needle, and I want to line that up right where the needle lays. You can see I've got the needle down, and that lines right up with the red in the center. I'm going to show you how to use this, and this helps save a bit of time so you don't have to draw all those lines. We're going to be working with the fabric C squares. Each block has 4 of these squares. They're going to go in the corner. I'm going to set one right there. And then you have to grab 4 of your fabric B squares. Here's your C. I'm going to put this on a little mini cutting board. And then you've got 4 of your fabric B squares. You're going to place them right sides together in the corners. So you want to match up the corners. And we're going to be sewing diagonally across. This part right here is going to get cut off. So if you want to pin, you can pin right there. Now that I've got that one pinned, I can pin one more in the opposite corner. You can't go all the way around and pin, because if you put another one here and pin, you can see you're overlapping here. You'll sew over the squares. Put one in the opposite corner and grab a pin And I do recommend pinning for the square and a square. You don't want these sliding, just like that. And here's how you use this diagonal seam tape. I flipped one of my pins around. As I sew, I want to be able to pull the pin out. Let's make sure that these are nice and straight. We're ready to sew, and we're sewing down the middle. So we're going to follow the red line. Sometimes you're sewing and they have you draw a line down the middle and then sew a 1/4 inch on either side. If that's the case, you could use the black lines. I'm going to line up the corner with my needle, and I'm actually going to hand crank and get my needle in there and get it started. And now as I sew, I want to make sure this is nice and flat, and I keep this corner right here on the red. Now I'm using leaders and enders because this is an older machine. And I talked about that in the first video. Now we're going to spin it around and sew on this side. And I actually didn't need to pull the pin because the pin isn't in the way of the foot. I'm going to line that up and then make sure this is on the red. I have to cut off the little squares. Now I've got both of these corners sewn right across the center, and I didn't have to draw a line. So you can try this tape if you like that, or if you like drawing lines, you can draw lines. It just depends. I'm going to pull out the pins, and we're going to take this over to the cutting table. You want to grab a ruler. This one has a 1/4 inch line. Line it up corner to corner. This to me is a little too small to keep to do something with. Let's flip it around the other way. Line up your 1/4 inch line, corner to corner, and I'm 1/4 inch away from the sewing line. That's what it's going to look like, and then you're going to take it over to your iron and press and press. I find it easier to press toward the triangle. If you want to press toward the dark side, you can. You would just press in. But the fabric seems to want to go like that, so I'm going to press it that way. What we're going to do now is get our other 2 squares, right sides down, and we want to pin these in the other corners. You can see how when you're lying it down, everything should line up. And we're going to take this back to the machine, and we're going to do the same thing. Sew corner to corner and corner to corner. We're going to line up underneath, and I'm going to needle down. On my newer machines, I don't necessarily have to do this where I needle down in the corner. This one's just a little weird because it's an older machine. Keep this right here lined up with the red. Those 2 are sewn on. I'm going to take the pins off. I'll take it to my cutting board. We're going to cut those 2 corners off. Back at the cutting table, sometimes I say cutting board, cutting table, we're cutting stuff here. Going to line up the ruler corner to corner. I've got my 1/4 inch away. Let's trim that. And same thing, line up your ruler. Got my line here corner to corner, trim. And then we're going to flip these out and press, and then we'll measure this. It looks pretty good. I can't give the measurement. It's in the pattern. You want to check your pattern and measure and make sure it's the right size. One thing I will show you, this side right here doesn't completely line up. Before I go cutting anything off, what I want to check is to make sure I've got a 1/4 inch here, because we don't want to cover our point when we sew it into our block, but if you do, don't panic. So I'm going to measure, make sure I've got the 1/4 inch. It looks like I have more than. I think I need to even off that side. And possibly the same thing on this side. On this side, I was able to trim. And then on this side, this piece that's slightly higher is correct. This piece is a little bit short. So when I sew my next piece of fabric, I want to make sure I line up with this piece and sew straight as I put it together in my block. Go ahead and make 4 of these, and then we'll go to the next step. Here's my other 3 square and a square blocks. This one's really short on this side, so I stuck a pin in it to remind myself. They all came out pretty good. I'm going to stack them up and set them underneath my clappers and just let the clappers sit on top of them and flatten them. I have a couple different size clappers. I've got 3 that are long like this and 1 that's small. Some people have square ones. I'm just going to set it like that over on the ironing board and let it sit. Next, you want to pull 1 fabric A square, 2 fabric D squares, and 1 fabric E square. We're going to be cutting these corner to corner and corner to corner. I'm sewing up this block right here. You'll see on the inside is where the fabric E is going to go, and then on the outside here is the fabric A, and your fabric D is the pink. That's why there's two fabric Ds. We're making hourglass blocks. One of the things I like to do is use the lines on my cutting mat to help make sure I'm actually cutting corner to corner. I'm going to line up the corner with one of the straight lines. Make sure it's straight, corner to corner. And you can draw a line first if you like. I'm going to put the blade out on my rotary cutter, set it right there on that corner. Bring my ruler over. This is being like ridiculously accurate, but make sure now I'm lined up, and you can see the ruler is lined up along that line as well. So your cutting mat can definitely help. Hold that down. Now if you're comfortable and your fabric hasn't shifted, you can just move the ruler and line up corner to corner. But I really like using the lines on my cutting mat. I don't even know if that cut. Oh, it did. So I'm going to separate. I'm going to turn it. I'm going to put that side along the line right here, and I'll show you another way to do this. And then the corner is right here. So this is cutting one at a time. The two triangles. This just helps line everything up. So if you feel like you can't line stuff up with just the ruler, use the lines on your cutting mat. Nice and straight here, and then you want to make sure the corner is lined up with another line. We have two more triangles. Let me show you another way to cut the triangles. You can use a rotating cutting mat, and if you're comfortable, you could cut all of these at once. You could stack up all 4 pieces of fabric. Let's go ahead and cut 2 pieces of fabric since these are the same, and you can line it up inside the lines on this cutting mat. This is a Kimberly Cuts 5.5 inch square cutting mat. See, the line on the outside is 5.5. This line says 4.5. No way around showing the measurements on this one because I'm showing you how to line it up on your cutting mat. It's very nice, it's convenient. You can line it up, one right on top of the other, and this is a rotating mat, so it turns. I need to cut corner to corner, and you can see the lines here, 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 and here. There goes the parrot. Line up your ruler, and then be careful when you pick up your ruler, and then you can just turn, line up the ruler. The lines on this really help. And now I have all of these triangles, so that went a little faster because I cut both pieces of fabric at once. I only have one piece left to cut. Let's go ahead and cut this one. Now we have all of our triangles. Let's lay out our hourglass blocks. Each hourglass block is going to have 2 pink, and the points go in the center. So 1 pink, and then you're going to have one, it's the tractor for this one, and then one with the chicken feet, like that. I'm going to lay all 4 of these out. These are all laid out. This gives you an opportunity to double check. Pinks are pointing towards the center. 1 tractor, 1 chicken feet. We're ready to go over to the machine. We're going to pin like that, 1 chicken feet to 1 pink, and I'm going to put the pins on the seam line where I'm going to sew to make sure I sew in the right spot. The pin, and then we want the pink to the tractor. I'm going to pin, and then we want to sew here and here. I'm going to be leaving this tape on my machine. I think we're going to need something like this for the B block. I like to pull my pins out as I sew. Going to keep them joined together, and we are going to press these. Here's our triangles. I'm going to press them to the pink. So this one, we're going to press this direction, and then this one, we're going to press this direction. These are nice and pressed. You can cut this off with scissors, or you can use your rotary cutter, whatever you like. Since you pressed both of these toward the pink, they're going in opposite directions. We're going to put these together, and your seams are going to nest. They'll lock. When you slide them together, they nest, and it's really nice. They lock together, so you know you've got it lined up. I'm going to pin that, and then I want to make sure the rest of it is straight, and add a pin on either side, and then we'll sew that seam, and we'll press this, and we'll see how I did on my hourglass block. Let's go sew this seam. The seam is sewed, It does say to press this open on the back. I don't like pressing open. I'm just going to pick a side and press to one side. That's pressed. I just measured this. They make this oversized. When you go to measure, you're going to have extra all the way around. So your block is going to come out perfect. So even if your seams aren't matching up, the way the pattern is written, this is a little bit big, so you'll trim it off and it'll come out nice and even. Here's what that looks like trimmed. That came out really nice. I really like when they make things just big enough so you have a little bit extra all around and you can trim it down without having to worry about anything. We need to have 4 of these total. I've got all of these sewn and trimmed. Now we can lay out our block. I went to get my center square, which is fabric F, and realized that I didn't cut any of the fabric Fs. So I need to go cut the fabric F. Now I have all my pieces. Let's put our block together. Your fabric F goes in the center. Then you have your hourglass blocks. For this one, the tractor print goes around your center square. So tractor, 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 tractor. And then you've got your square and a squares. 1, 2, 3. And I've got the one here that's short. I'm going to put the short seam toward the outside today. That way, if I end up needing to trim my block, that might get evened out. If not, I'll leave the pin in it, so I'll remember that that part of the block is short. They have us assembling this in rows. You'll sew these together. So this to that, and that to that, and they show us pressing toward the pink. These together, pressing out from the orange, and these pressing toward the pink. That's going to let the seams nest. I've got my design board right next to my sewing machine. It's over there. So I'm going to sew these two, and these two. I am going to go ahead and place a couple pins. One thing to watch for as you're sewing this block, your needle should hit right there where these seams intersect, because that's going to give you your 1/4 inch seam allowance over here without taking away your point. Here's how I pin these. I put an extra pin right here and right here to remind me to keep an eye out for that intersection. I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/4 inch. Got my guide foot on my machine. Let's sew these 3 seams. Let's see how I did with my corners. I didn't catch the point, but do you see how I have a little extra space there? Ideally, it's going to be just like that. I have a little extra. I'm fine with that. I'm not seam ripping and going back and fixing that. I'm going to leave it. This one looks good. Let's look at the last one. And I think I'm going to have the same thing. I think I'm going to have a little space. I do. Again, you know, it's very close. When you're looking at these things from far away and they're in your quilt, you're not going to see them. But if you're a perfectionist and you sew like this, you need to go back and sew a little bit closer so you'll catch that and have everything match up exactly. I'm going to press these. Everything is pressed. I'm going to go ahead and cut the threads holding these together. You can leave them. For me, it becomes a little too much with all of this connected when I sew these on. I'm going to do the same thing, pin everything, and then sew with the 1/4 inch seam. Let's look at these. I think they're going to turn out the same. I think I'm going to have a space. Yep, I was watching them as I sewed, and you can see here's where my seam is, and there's where that intersection is. So my 1/4 inch might be off a little bit, but again, I'm just gonna leave it because it's like that way on the other side, unless I want to go back and fix them all. This one turned out. Look at that. So my guess now isn't that my 1/4 inch seam or my guide foot is off. My guess is just my piecing and my cutting is off. But I'm okay with that. I'm going to go press these. Here's where we are so far. We need to sew that seam and then this seam. And it says we can press toward the center. So if you've been pressing following the instructions, these are pressed this direction and we're pressed away from the orange. So again, our seams are going to lock and they're going to nest. So you'll feel them lock into place. Makes it nice and easy to pin. Go ahead and pin. Actually, before you pin and sew, double check. around the center. Tractor, 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 tractor. Okay. Everything is where it's supposed to be. It never hurts to double check. Even if you're leaving things hooked together as you sew, sometimes things get flipped upside down. So I'm going to pin this and sew this one, and then I'll flip it around and pin the other one and sew that side. You've got points here again too. We'll see if these match. Going to go press this and then we'll see how it turned out. I've got everything pressed to the orange. Let's flip it and look at the corners. Here we go. Actually points, not corners. This one is just about perfect. It looks like I might have cut off the tiniest bit of the tip. This one I have a little extra space. These look really good here. These look really good here. Good. A little bit of space. Honestly, the little bit of space or the tiniest tiny bit that I caught in this one, again, you are never going to see that in the quilt. It came out beautifully. Love it. Everything's facing the right way. Everything seems to fit. I am going to measure. I've got some pieces that are a little bit bigger than the other pieces. So measure it according to the pattern and trim off anything that you need to. And if it's about the right size, if you want, you can just trim off any of the little threads, or if they don't bother you, you can leave them. I need to make 2 more of these. I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll show you at the end. We're going to move on and make our bee blocks. We're going to start on our bee block. We're going to make 1 bee together. You need to make a total of 3 bees. For 1 bee, you're going to need 2 fabric Ks, 6 of your fabric E's, and 2 of your fabric J's. It tells us to draw those lines corner to corner on the back of the E's and the J's. Since I'm using the diagonal seam tape today, I'm not going to do that. The instructions have us doing this in 2 separate steps. You can do all of these steps together for the bee wing because these squares are so small. When we put them in the corners of the block, they're not going to overlap. So it tells us to take our fabric E, place in the top left and bottom right corners of a K. So you can place, and one thing you can look at is we're going to be stitching across and then trimming and flipping. Make sure you get a little bit of the print that you don't end up with all beige. Now I'm just going to lay these down before I pin them. And then take your J and put it in the lower left. And you're working with squares, so you can rotate these. If you accidentally put it in the wrong spot like that, whether or not I've got upper, lower, right, left, it's going to be fine because you can just turn your block when we're putting it in the bee block and it will work. These are tiny pieces. Take your time, make sure you've got your right sides together, lining up the edges of the square. If your fabric is fraying a little bit like mine is and it bothers you, take a minute and trim the fuzzies off. They don't really bother me. I've got all my pins in. We're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch corner to corner on each of these little squares. This is going to be what's called snowballing the corners. Now, instead of putting in one of my little pieces of scrap fabric, I can cut my block that's on the back and then put in the next corner and just keep rotating them until I have all the corners stitched on both of these little blocks. Let's take these over to the table and trim, and then we're going to flip and press. So we're going to line up the 1/4 inch line on the lines we've just sewed, and we're going to trim. The snowball block is a really fun block. It is a little more challenging when you're working with teeny tiny pieces, but you can make these really big and put them together and make a quilt. It looks really nice. You can think about if you did each of the centers in a different color, it would be really colorful, lots of fun, great way to use up scrap fabric. That's what it looks like once it's trimmed. Let's trim the second one. I'm going to take this over to my iron and press like this. Just flip up the corner and press. I've got these pressed and you can see they just want to keep flipping up. I'm going to set them under the clappers and let them sit while we work on the next section. You can check your pattern It gives you a measurement. A quick note, I did measure, barely trimmed. None of my sides are perfectly straight. They're still going to work. It's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. We're going to get our fabric G and L pieces. I've got 2 fabric G's and 2 fabric L's. This is going to be really easy. We just need to sew these together, and it has us pressing toward the fabric G. So what I'm going to do, these 2 together and these 2 together, and then we'll sew down the middle. Before I sew these 2 together, I am going to go ahead and press toward the brown. It's going to help them lie nice and flat while I sew that final seam. That's sewed. I want to press that toward the brown. You want to grab 2 fabric B squares and your stripes. You can draw a diagonal line on the back of these, and for these squares we have to do one at a time because they're both going to go on the side here with the brown stripe. So you can see if you just lay them down, they're overlapping each other. So we have to do one at a time. It's the same procedure we've been doing. We try to line things up, be as accurate as we can, and we're going to sew corner to corner, trim, and flip. Let's head back over to the machine, stitch that. Let's stitch corner to corner. I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away and then flip. I'm ready to sew the next seam. I'm going to trim that a 1/4 inch away, flip it, and press it. Here's what that looks like. Now I've measured it and it's actually a little bit big. So where it's uneven here, I'm going to be able to trim, and I'm going to be able to trim right here. Here it is after it's trimmed. Fabric A, fabric A. We're going to sew these on, and it has us press out toward fabric A, and that's because the back of this block has some seams on it. It'll be easier to press out toward the fabric A. Here's our little bee booty with our fabric A squares. There's a measurement that it gives you in the pattern, so double check your measurements, make sure it's good, trim if you need to. If anything's short, you can mark it with a pin. The next thing we're going to assemble is the B center unit. We need to get 2 fabric H's and 1 fabric M. I'm going to lay out our fabric H, M in the center, and H. We need to pin these and sew with our 1/4 inch seam. This unit is sewn. It tells us to press these toward the orange. I'm going to go ahead and press that. Here's what that looks like once it's pressed. There's a measurement in your pattern. Go ahead and measure it. Make sure it's the right size. Then we're going to grab a couple of fabric E squares. I've got my fabric E's. I'll turn this like it is in the instructions. So brown, orange, brown. You can draw a line on the back. Your fabric E's are going to go in the upper right and the lower right. Again, you can kind of flip and look. Make sure you're getting part of the fabric that you like. And then we're going to pin, sew, trim, and flip, just like before. I've got the corner sewn. This one's crooked. See? I can actually tell. See how you can see the white? It must have slipped when I was sewing, and you can see that it's not straight here, it's tilted. And then this one's also crooked. You see that? So clearly I have problems with small squares. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to trim them a 1/4 inch away, flip and press. That's what it's going to look like. It looks fine. I'll double check the measurements and make sure it's good, and even it out if I need to after I flip and press. I flipped it, pressed it, and measured it, and I was able to trim a little bit off. That's why I didn't want to seam rip and re-sew. I figured it would turn out okay, and it did. We're going to grab our little bee wings, the little snowball things, the small pieces that we started with. Now we need to pay attention to how we're placing these and where the little dark corners go. So here's the piece we just stitched. You've got brown, yellow, brown, and the 2 background corners. These are going to go like this. So you've got all brown right here. Make sure you're matching up the brown. So you've got your brown corner, your brown stripe, and your brown corner. And then you're going to put them right sides together. So with a 1/4 inch seam, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam, And it says to press these open. I'm not going to press them open. I'll just see whichever way the fabric wants to go, and then I'll show you. Now, as you pin, you'll notice your seams here and here will correspond with the seams on your stripe. Do you see that? So let me show you on the side that's not pinned. These will match up with these. So that when we open it up, it's going to look like this stripe here is continuous. I'll sew this side and press it, and we'll have a look at it. Here's how I pressed it on the back. I have it going toward the little snowball block, and here's the front. See how this looks like it goes here and then right up? These matched up really well. So if your little B-wing is shifted way down past the stripe, or it's off so much that it bothers you, I would go ahead and adjust that. And then this part here, up and down, slightly off, like, honestly, what do you call that? 1/32 of an inch, nobody's going to see it. But that's what that should look like. I'm going to go ahead and attach the other piece and press it, and then we'll have a look at this unit. Here's that unit. You can see it is not perfectly straight. I did measure, trim where I could, but the fabric here, you can see I've got a little dip here, so I know when I put the next piece on to follow that line. You can line it up like this against a line on the cutting mat, and you can see this piece is short. I just need to be careful when I put this in. It's going to come out fine. One of the reasons why I like to starch my fabric but not heavily starch it is for blocks like this. Having a good spray of that Faultless Heavy Finish makes the fabric easier to work with, but at the end, if my block is a little wavy or a little bit off, I can spray it again with the starch and it'll help shrink it, and then you can press it and it'll lay nice and flat. Now we're going to make the little bee head. We need to get 2 fabric Fs and a fabric I. I don't think I've ever worked with anything this small. We've got our fabric I and our fabric F, right sides together. You can try and flip and make sure you get the fabric that you like, but gosh, this is so tiny. I think it's just going to be luck of the draw. One there, let's see, okay, and one there. Gosh, these are small. You can go ahead and pin them. I double checked my measurements because in the picture it looks like fabric I is a lot longer, but it's really not. I've got everything measured correctly. I'm going to put my pin there. And I'm just going to turn this. I'm not even going to try to turn this tiny piece of fabric. Pin there, and we're going to stitch corner to corner, trim and flip. My seams are sewn. I'm not even going to worry about measuring. I'm just going to look at it. Get it about 1/4 inch away. These are so tiny. Trim off the edges, and we'll take it to the ironing board and we'll go ahead and press that. Here's that piece. I measured it, and you can see it's a little bit crooked. This part is good. This part kind of tilts down a bit. So again, when I go to assemble this, I need to be careful. I'm going to actually put a pin so I don't forget. I need to be careful of that part right there. Next, we need 2 fabric C's and a fabric D. Fabric C, fabric C, fabric D. Fabric D has to go on first. Here's where my little piece is short. So I'm going to take this, line it up here, and then I can pin it. What I can do is I know this side is straight, so I can lay that down, get it nice and straight, get this side nice and straight, and I'm actually going to pin, even though I'm not sewing here, I'm going to put a pin there just to make sure that stays straight. Put a pin here, and then make sure that's straight at the bottom. I'm going to use a lot of pins on this one. I'm going to try and get this as close to accurate as I can. And then you can see right there where the short part is. See the fabric here, and then the fabric on top is going to be fine. I'll catch it in the seam allowance. I want to make sure that I get the rest of it lined up real nice, and then we'll take it over to the machine and we're going to sew right along this line here. Once you've got that little seam sewn, you're going to open it up and press it toward the light side. They have you pressing it toward fabric D. Now I can tell that's not straight. Do you see that? Kind of almost bows out, and this side almost bows in. I'm not worried about it. These are cut nice and straight. We're going to put a fabric C on each side. What I'm going to do is line it up like this. So all I'm looking at is my fabric C. Make sure I get that bottom piece completely covered. That looks good. I'm going to put a couple of pins in. When I look at this, I do see a little bit of the other piece underneath. I want to make sure that's straight. I'm going to add a pin here, even though I'm not sewing there, keeping that bottom piece straight. I'm going to sew that and flip up and press toward fabric C. We're pressed toward fabric C. Here's what that looks like. You never know that was all wonky and crooked because it got taken up in the seam allowance. Looks pretty good. There is a measurement, and I'm going to double check mine against the measurement in the pattern because I've got part that sticks up a little bit. I'm hoping that I'll be able to trim that off. I measured it and I was able to cut this little bit off. That's great. Now it's nice and straight. Get all of your pieces together. We have what they call the B head unit, and then we've got the center part with the wings, and make sure that it goes this way like that, because this is the head. When you've got your seam allowance, that's going to match up real nice. You've got this piece, your little snowballs, the brown stripe with the corners, and then grab the bee booty, and the bee booty is going to go right there. And these seams do not match. These two seams go here, they're landing about here. When you put this together, this is going to end up matching with that brown stripe, kind of like that. I would say just do one piece at a time, pin and sew. If you want, you can take this, fold it in half, match up the seams, find the center. Sorry, I have a scratch on my thumb. I keep trying not to show it off on camera, but it's a little difficult. I've got the center here. I'm going to match that up with the center of the brown on the block below. Now I know it's nice and centered. And now I can put the rest of my pins in and we'll go sew that seam. We're going to open this and have a look. And I already had a look. Spoiler alert, it doesn't match up correctly. Do you see that? It looks like this isn't far enough down. Let's check our seam allowance. I've got a 1/4 inch line on that ruler. It looks like a good 1/4 inch seam. Everything seems in order. Now, ideally, there would be no space there and there. Here's the picture in the pattern. You see how this looks continuous? This kind of angles up, and this part goes straight. And then when you look at the one that I sewed, it kind of goes up, down, and then it goes straight. So what do? I can seam rip it and slide it down further. It's not going to take much. Do you see that? Or you can just leave it as is and then sew on the inside. However, I do have a 1/4 inch seam allowance already. So it's up to you if this happens. I think what I'll do, I'll go ahead and I'll sew another seam. We'll see if we can't get that head to match a little bit better. And then at the end, we'll measure the whole block and we'll see if it comes up short. There's the second seam. Let's open it. I haven't looked yet. Let's see if it made it better, worse, didn't matter. Better. That's much better. Now it's perfect on this side. This side is still a little bit off. I'm going to leave it at this point. We're going to go ahead and pin and sew on the next piece. We'll press our block and we'll measure it. And now what I'm going to do, this pin is where I want it to be. I pin the middle. I'm going to hold right there with my finger. Just going to pull, make sure that's nice and straight. Make sure this is nice and flat. Everything lines up, and we're going to stitch till we hit that middle pin. I want to needle down. And I've got the corners matching, but you can see that this is all wavy. Pull it, get it nice and flat, making sure everything lines up. There we go, like that. And then this needs to go this way. And I'm just going to sew really slowly and hold everything in place. That's another reason why I do like to starch my fabric, but not starch it to the point where it's so crisp that I can't pull or manipulate it. You can see it looks a little wavy. We're going to go over the ironing board. Before we press this, what I'm going to do is set the iron on that seam and flatten that seam. People call that setting the seam. It's going to make it nice and flat before I press my block. That'll get rid of the waviness. Now it's pretty flat, and I need to make sure I press it the right direction. I want to press this toward the bee booty block. I know that's not what it's called, but it keeps it straight in my head. So we're going to press it that way. Give that a press, and then we'll give the other part a press. And I'm going to set this under my clappers and let it set for a bit before I come back and measure it. I want to make sure that it's nice and flat. Try to get the best result that I can. I can tell that it's crooked, but again, I'm not worried about it. It's going to be fine. If yours is crooked a little bit, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. It's a big quilt. Nobody will know. I'm going to put that on there and put that on there and let that sit. Here's the back of the bee block so you can see how everything is pressed. I did measure it, and no surprise, it's short here. Right here by about 1/4 of an inch, and right here about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to put a note on this before I put it away so I know that it's short. Here's how he turned out. Pretty good. Now I'm not doing the embroidery detail here and the little antennas. I may do it later, but really, honestly, probably not. It's probably going to be just like this. What I'm thinking of doing, since I have to make 2 more of these, is making one on my Juki TL 2020 PE. That's the Platinum Edition. It's like the Juki TL, I think it's called 2010, which is white and blue. It's a straight stitch only machine that also has a guide foot on it. I'm kind of curious to try it on a different machine and see if I do any better with my seam allowances. I'm going to make all the rest of my blocks, then I'll come back and show you everything. Let's look at all the bee blocks. This is the one we sewed together where I took the time to pin, fix anything I thought was too crooked, made sure to measure everything as we built our block. The next 2 blocks I decided to sew on my Juki. I didn't pin and I didn't measure anything as we went. So as we did each step, when I was filming, I measured each individual step and I thought, I'm just going to try to throw these together, no pins, on the quote nicer machine and see how they turn out. This is the best bee block. Use your pins and measure. Are you ready? Here we go. Both of these are small and both of them have really crooked heads. It's really funny. You can see this is really uneven. Everything's really uneven. The head isn't too bad here, but it's way off right here. The snowball blocks just don't look quite as nice. And the other one, I had similar problems. You can see these are longer, this is shorter, and the head on this one, man, this bee must have smashed his head into the hive on the way out for the morning. They're pretty rough looking. I decided to go ahead and fix these. They're still not perfect, but I think they look much better. This one, for some reason, it's really short in the center, and in order to completely fix this, I would have to take the whole thing apart, measure this, measure this, measure this, you know, remeasure everything. I didn't want to do that. So I concentrated on fixing this and just making sure that it's more centered and it wasn't so far off. So you can see it's not perfect, but it's much better than it was. And the other one, I did the same thing. I seam ripped and then I relined it up. I folded that in half and I pinned it, and then I used a number 4 stitch length, so a long stitch, like a basting stitch, and all I did was basted right over the bee head, and I opened it, made sure I liked the way that it looked, and then went ahead and stitched the seam over. They look much better. I don't mind that they're not perfect, but they look much better than they were. They were kind of, I don't know, a little too weird looking for me. So those are fixed. Let's move on to the other blocks. This was my first farmer's market block. This is the one we stitched together. Let's look at the other 2. I decided to try stitching these on the Juki as well, just to see if there was a difference. The biggest difference I noticed are my points. Look at the points on this block. I cut off a little bit. I cut off a little bit. I cut off some. And I cut off some. Same thing here. I caught it here. This one looks really good there. That looks okay, and that looks okay. There's obviously a difference between my sewing machines with their 1/4 inch guide feet. I need to measure the seam allowance on my sewing machines. Let's look at the other farmer's market block. Same thing, I lost a point here. That looks good, that looks good. I have a little space here. That's right on, and I lost a little bit there. Again, not too worried about it. What's wonderful about quilts like these, there's so much going on. The fabrics are so pretty that little things like that I really don't think you're going to notice. And it's got chickens, so everyone's going to be looking at the chickens. Everything came out great. Thank you for sewing with me today. We have our 3 farmers market blocks and our 3 wonky bee blocks. They all look good though, don't they? They're all so cute. So we finished our sewing for March. I'll be back in April. We're going to work on the flower blocks and the leaf blocks. We're going to make 2 flower blocks and 5 leaf blocks. If you look at the picture of the quilt, here's your flowers here and here, and then this flower has 2 leaves and this flower has 3 leaves. I went ahead and looked at how these were put together. We're going to be using the same type of techniques. I think so far, even going forward and looking at the flower and leaf, the bee has been the most complicated block. I'll be back here in April, probably about the same time. I try to get everything cut and prepped at the beginning of the month and then do my sewing and get my video done in the middle of the month. That way you've got a few weeks to work on your blocks. Nobody's going to get behind. Don't worry about it. Sew at your own pace. Jump in whenever you like. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. If there's any comments or questions, leave them for me below. All the information on where to get the pattern, the quilt kit, the schedule, everything from Fat Quarter Shop will be linked below. I would love to know, after you sew your bees, how they turn out. Thank you again for joining me for this so long, and I will see you back in April. Bye, everybody.